Hello and welcome to the World Discord podcast. I am Joel Ostro. Who the hell are you?
I'm Brian Endless. How the hell are you, Joel?
I'm okay. I'm okay.
I think you're
How
supposed
is
to
your?
say where the hell are you, or and then I'll come back with why the hell are you?
What? Yeah, and where the hell are you? What's
Yeah,
with the damn swords?
I'm in my basement office with swords to protect myself. Why the hell are you?
I have no idea why the hell I am.
Are we
Oh,
actually doing a show today? Or are we just doing a old comedy bit?
I think we're doing your favorite show, Carl. Uh, this is episode one in the Who Benefits series.
Excellent.
But actually, this has nothing to do with Carl. This is more about uh, the degradation and bastardization of our democracy uh, as much as anything else.
Excellent. Yeah, I should probably give my bias here, Joel, since I definitely have one. Joel's reference is to the fact that a couple of years ago I founded the Come Together Project, which is looking at the idea of how we can bring Americans separated by the culture wars together and really focus
Yeah.
on things that will benefit the vast majority of us, mostly the people who work for a living, and looking at how the tiny percentage at the top are ripping us off and taking everything, all the money and power for themselves. And this really all comes down to two words: who benefits?
Exactly right. And this has been an increasing and accelerating problem, at least since about 1980, the early 1980s for sure. And as I think we'll lay out over this episode and the next several, really, um, where we are at now is by design, intentional, and methodical over a long period of time. This consolidation of power, political and economic, in very very few hands.
Absolutely. You want me to do a little history?
Oh God. Okay.
A
A
little bit of history.
little
Try
bit
to
of
keep it
history.
a little bit. You need some names to understand what's going on here.
We're going to start calling
Uh,
people names.
Now, yes, I shall start calling people names. Before Ronald Reagan, and a lot of people who consider themselves to be on the left will take all our problems back to the Reagan administration and Thatcher in Britain. And those are decent places to look because a lot of the public interest started there. But the concept started before him.
Of course.
You can go all the way back to Hayek, the Austrian scholar and economist. You can go to Milton Friedman in the 70s. They're certainly important.
Ayn Rand.
Philosophically, Ayn Rand, absolutely. Ayn Rand wrote some terrible fiction that is still followed by way too many
Terrible
people.
things. Bad person.
Yeah, bad person, bad writer, and yet some people still insist on following her.
Yep.
I take it back, actually. I think one of the most important is William F. Buckley, who, if you're old enough, you might remember as the conservatives' intellectual. He was the best thinker on the right. The guy was actually a genius. He came out of grad school in the 1940s, 1950s, and he really kind of started what is politically become the libertarian movement and took up a lot of these ultra liberal, by liberal we mean economically liberal, free market policies. You got to get used to the different words here because we're going to be talking about
Oh yeah.
market liberalism, and that's not political liberalism. But William F. Buckley is important because he influenced so many people. And what Buckley's philosophy came down to was the New Deal was the worst thing that had ever happened to Americans. That John Maynard Keynes, a lot of the basis for the New Deal on the economic side, was the worst thing that ever happened. And that the best thing for Americans is to be given their freedom to engage in the market. But what Buckley meant by freedom, and what
Mm.
almost everyone else since him who pushes that word at us, freedom, what they meant was freedom for the elites,
Yeah.
freedom for the people who start with a lot of money, freedom for the people who start in business, freedom from government, that government should leave them alone so they can do whatever they want to do. And that somehow this will benefit the rest of us and the whole society. And this is one of the things we see coming into the 80s with Reagan and Thatcher's trickle down economics.
Correct.
And was an idea whose time never was here, never came. And yet Reagan pushed it forward. And no matter how much it's been discredited since that point in time, that is still in there. And
Can I
Will,
jump in for a
yeah,
sec to add a little bit of the historical context?
absolutely.
Um, well, first, as a completely unrelated aside, William F. Buckley Jr. did contribute one useful thing to society, and that was his on language column in the back of the New York Times Sunday magazine, which I read. I discovered that when I was in high school, and I loved reading
Oh
his
yeah.
columns about words and language. Those were harmless and entertaining and fun, uh,
I
completely
actually
non
loved
political.
this. I loved listening to Buckley. The guy was really
Oh, I
just a
couldn't listen to him. He was a pompous son of a bitch.
yeah, but an intellectual who was actually on TV and who talked to other intellectuals was kind of cool for the too
Yeah,
smart kid in grade
yeah.
school and late grade school and high school.
But in terms of the idea that government is bad, I do think it remains and will continue to remain important in this country, in the United States, um, to not lose sight of the fact that this idea resonated in American political culture because it tapped into really the core of American political culture, what it means to be an American liberal, America's version of democracy. We were founded even before the founding of the country. Those who were kicked out and fled the British islands due to religious persecution had a strong antipathy towards, wariness of, skepticism of, dislike of government, and that was a sentiment held by the revolutionaries, by the founders. It was you can talk about the Tea Party, the whole no taxation without representation. All of them, like what it means to be American, or what it is meant to be American politically, was to be skeptical of and hostile towards authority, and thus we had the complex overlapping and competing jurisdictions that the Constitution created, because creating a system where everyone was skeptical of and distrusting of everyone else, the idea was, would prevent government from doing things to the people that the people didn't want, or at least they gave the people several mechanisms to rein in big government.
Now, I'm going to agree with you completely, but I need to put another twist in there, which is that just like now, we have different definitions of the
Correct.
people. The people
Correct.
does not mean everyone.
No, of
The
course not.
people at that time were rich white landowners.
Yep.
Land did not mean your house. Land meant you owned a lot of farmland. And even there, it wasn't so much that I don't know if you've been watching the American Revolution, the latest Ken Burns thing, but
Nah,
it is both boring, plus I've been getting something out of it every single episode. So I do recommend it from that
sounds like
side.
Ken Burns.
Slow and plotting, really bad, but really good. A big thing that he came down with was, we need to remember the founders were big landholders. And George Washington's number one issue with the British was he was the biggest landholder in the colonies, and he was the biggest proponent of moving American land to the west past
Yeah.
the Appalachian Mountains and taking over Indian territory. And the British stopped him and others from doing that. The British did not want the Americans to expand, and the Americans who wanted to expand were the richest of the founding fathers. So even then, our system of government and economics has been based on those richest people not being, or those richest people feeling they're being limited by the existing government.
It's
And
kind
not
of,
wanting
I mean, I agree and disagree at the same time, because as we know, on several of those core issues, particularly uh, who are the citizens, right? Who
Yep.
were the people? There was real division and pretty deep cleavage among the founders on the answer to that question. And I think there was awareness on all of them that their answer may not be the answer going forward. And I do think there was an agreement and conscious effort to create a system that, regardless of how that definition of who the people were might change in the future, that whoever the people were, however they were defined, they would still have the ability to rein in government. Because that was what they did agree on.
And
So,
that was absolutely a significant piece of it, and that was
and,
both for the upper classes and for everybody else.
and that's why Buckley's that part of his argument is something that really across the American political spectrum remains. I mean, the accusation that Democrats want big government is kind of silly. No American wants big intrusive government.
Right,
It's just I think the difference is over what the word intrusive means,
right.
rather
Well,
than
over intrusive, but also big versus small government have become pieces of propaganda that have
Mhm.
been thrown out. And
Absolutely,
I think this started at the very beginning. They were politicized terms.
for sure.
So I like Robert Reich right now. You know, one of liberal
Yeah,
economist, worked in a number of administrations. Reich has something I really love as a perspective, which is it shouldn't be big government versus small government. It should be who the government works for.
correct. Whose
That's
government
the
is it?
question we're asking.
Correct.
But the political question is one side says the other side wants big government,
Yeah,
the
yeah,
other says
yeah.
they want better government, and we never quite get to who the government works for.
And that's strategic, right? Because the right has leveled that accusation that the Democrats want big government because they know no American wants big government. So
Exactly.
it's a very successful. Let's get on to what we really wanted to discuss. So the turn against uh, a turn towards government serving a smaller number of people,
Excellent.
which is the way to put
Excellent.
it, right? And that
Well,
does really go back to
yeah,
the quote unquote Reagan Revolution, right?
a couple of things on this. The ancient history is government has probably always served a tiny number of people
Sure.
forever. It has become so much more blatant since the
Yeah.
1980s. This is the place we're focusing on. One of the things that's interesting to me, I've been giving a lot of thought to this lately. Uncle Karl Marx, had something very wrong when it came to the question of the classes, the rich class, the bourgeoisie, and the proletariat. He thought that the ultra rich owners had common class interests and that they acted together strictly because of their class interests. He said it's not that they meet and that they get together and that they have these Kabbalistic meetings where they put on their hats and smoke their cigars and have their scotch. They do some of that because they go to the same clubs, but he
Yeah.
looked at it as a class interest coming together. The more I look at it, the more I really am firmly seeing that it is a teeny tiny number
Oh
of
yeah.
incredibly rich people who have been driving this. Now, the other
But that's what
incredible,
Adam Smith foresaw, right? Like
absolutely,
the
he did.
unregulated capital, like monopolizations, monopoly
Yeah,
capitalism, right?
he absolutely, and he thought that was coming unless we stopped it, and we didn't stop
Yep.
it.
Yep.
But these
Okay.
tiny number of people, you can go down to the people who are only worth 20 or 30 or 40 million. They're benefiting from what the ultra rich do.
Correct. But
There's
they're
a
not driving
tiny
it.
number, exactly. There's a tiny number of ultra rich doing this on purpose.
Mhm.
And the purpose, I think, there's a number of people involved with it, but I think a name we're going to use a lot in this series, the next few episodes as it goes on, is the Koch brothers.
Of which there is
KOC,
only one brother left right
there's
now.
now only one. Yeah. Well, there's actually a couple, just no, only one of the two.
Yeah.
There were the Koch brothers. It was a family of 5 kids, and 4 of them worked together. One was the outcast. But Charles and David Koch, KOCH, were the main brothers who were involved in this. And they started in the late 60s and early 1970s. They had a rich family. Their rich family had passed on their wealth. Their wealth was mostly in oil at the time. They have massively expanded into the biggest conglomerate in the world right now, and they went way beyond oil. But one of the things that Charles and David Koch realized was their money made them more powerful than anyone around them,
Correct.
except for the federal government.
Correct.
And that was the one place that could rein them in. And in the 60s and early 70s, what they saw, particularly on the environment, was the politicians in Washington were starting to listen to the liberals in academia And there were plenty of liberals in academia. Let's be be clear about that. And those people in academia were starting to say, well, maybe pollution is bad, and maybe
And the
we should.
environmental movement in general outside of academia,
100%
right?
started in the 70s, yeah, academia and otherwise, and nonprofits and others. And these people are saying maybe we need regulations to rein in big business that's polluting, and people were accepting of this idea.
And it
And
was tied to the Koch brothers' core interest, which was drilling oil and gas.
absolutely,
And Greenpeace and the Sierra Club or Wildlife Fund were responding to really reckless abandon in that industry that was threatening extinction to whether we were talking about harp seals or whales
yeah,
and polar bears, a whole bunch of other
absolutely,
species that the unregulated drilling was threatening, and
yeah,
so those environmental and just general pollution of water and air, and you mentioned the 60s and 70s, but it is important to remember that the Koch brothers did not have political power in the 1970s.
oh no,
At least
was
not on that
agreed,
issue. Richard Nixon was an environmentalist. I mean, he was the
absolutely.
first environmentalist president. Um, it wasn't Rumsfeld. It doesn't matter who. He created the EPA, the Clean Air and Clean Water Act were under Nixon. Like
Well, the
it is.
Kochs were like the Democrats or the Republicans. They were
No,
part of
they
the
did
group
not.
that pushed the Republican
That's the
Party
point.
to the right, and that's
Correct.
incredibly important. Thank you for bringing that in. It really wasn't until Reagan the party got pushed to the right. We can talk about the anti-abortion movement as a
Correct.
starting point.
Oh, and the
Yeah,
anti-civil rights, right? I mean, if you read Levitsky and Ziblatt and How Democracy Dies, they and I would focus more on the economic inequality that we're talking about. They focus on race, and all of this is a reaction to the Voting Rights Act and civil rights. My argument is that they used the racism as a more popular message to rally voters in the Southern strategy in the South,
yeah.
but really the objective was enrichment and empowerment of the few.
So I
So,
want to take a couple more things and then come right back to that, because I think
sure.
that leads us into a lot of other things. That's kind of the starting point for where we're at
Yeah.
politically, for the political change. The Koch brothers, let's jump forward and look at their entire effort from the 70s, where it started, through to the present day.
And it
They
was
had
really about a quarter century of effort.
more
Brilliant.
than that, I think 40 years. Yeah,
Yeah.
I think it's significantly more than that. They have three pillars.
Before they won the House, it took 25 years for them to
Yes.
reorganize American politics
Forget
and take control of
the
the House.
contract on America with Newt Gingrich.
Correct. Yeah. Go ahead. Sorry.
I think it's probably the contract with America, but the contract on
No, it
America.
was a contract on America. We recognized that at the time, if you
Yeah,
remember.
we
People were
did.
calling it that.
Absolutely. So we are sitting with the Koch brothers. They created a movement, and that movement, we can look back now and say it has three pillars. The
Mhm.
first pillar was to get conservatives into academia and to get libertarian thinking into academia. They started that at George Mason University, and they put tens of millions of dollars into funding economics and political science at George Mason. And then that went to other universities on the East Coast. They
Correct.
realized they really just wanted to focus on the elite East Coast schools that influenced Washington, was their most important targets. And then they did things like funding Freedom University and others, and the law schools there that started cranking out conservative justices.
The economics
Yeah,
department at the University of Chicago also benefited with
absolutely,
a
absolutely.
shitload of Nobel Prize winners in
Yep.
economics, I believe.
So that's point with pillar one. The second
Yep.
one is they started a different kind of think tank. So there were the beginnings of think tanks in the 1970s, the way we think of them right now. But the Koch brothers think tank wasn't just a put out ideas that people can pick up.
It was
The Koch
activist.
brothers think tank led to things like ALEC, the American Legislative Exchange
Yep.
Council. And ALEC has been writing laws for the Republican Party since the 1990s now.
Local and state government level, let's be clear.
Local, state, and federal too.
But it
They no
started,
longer
their strategy started with taking over local and state governments.
100%. Very good. They no longer, though, were giving ideas and lobbying. They were directly
Correct.
writing legislation at local,
Correct.
state, and eventually at federal levels, and feeding it to the politicians who they had helped to get elected to
Correct.
move them forward. And this was the legislation that we think of now. This is anti-choice legislation. This is gun legislation. This is banning books legislation. This is legislation for lower taxes. This is legislation for less regulation. All of these
Culture war legislation.
100%.
But
All
key
of the
to it,
culture wars.
the key to their political strategy in that local and state was to make elections non-competitive, to secure for their extreme right candidates that their nonprofits and think tanks help to recruit and develop and get elected at the local and state level, to then do redistricting and alter election rules in local elections so that those districts became non-competitive. And then
mostly they focused on
further to the right
first, and then they spread out after that. They focused local first, and then they spread up from there.
And the Democratic Party always emphasized federal elections. Congress, Senate, President never. And the reason I mentioned it took about 25 years for Democrats to realize, oh, we've lost all of the local house, all of the state houses, and
I don't
so
think
many
Democrats have realized that yet.
Some started to recognize that after about 25 years of this, but the political part of it is really important, Brian, because the Koch brothers understood that just focusing on the federal level wouldn't do it.
Absolutely.
Because most politics are local and people voted then their pocketbooks. Yep. They needed to control the local and build up, and that was their winning strategy that has
absolutely.
We are.
People are still taught that they're voting their pocketbooks, but they've been talking to some propaganda on that one.
Correct.
Let's keep going here. So the Kochs now have over 450 of these think tanks in a network, and they work on different issues, and they work together and they work separately, but their job is to put out pieces that will go to the public that will influence law. And then there's a third part, which is incredibly important, is they realize they have to take this to the citizen level. It's not just the academic elite, not just the think tanks. And they started groups, and they started groups like Moms for Liberty. I usually think of them as Moms Against Liberty. And they focus on all the things in school, the parents' rights, the book banning, the LGBTQ issues in schools, the racist issues in schools. All of these things are that type of group. The Tea Party came directly from the Koch.
For sure.
Turning Point comes from
Turning Point. Do you think Proud Boys and those other ones are directly, or are they only indirectly connected?
They are directly. They are all things that have been set up by these groups. And we can look back on this one. Let's go to the start. The first thing, and this goes back to your civil rights question earlier, the first thing we can really track this to is in the late 1960s to the early 1970s, all of these ideas were going through. Nixon and the Democrats were right here. Nixon looks like an insanely liberal Democrat now with his environmental policies and his regulations and things like that. And what the libertarians, what Koch and Buckley and others realized was they needed to have a political movement. They needed to take over a party. The Republican Party was the one that made sense, and they needed to create their own political movement. And the way they started it was they took the Democratic Party in the South that had come together and had moved to the right because of racism.
Because of race.
And because of the civil rights movement. And they added to that. And
they captured the racist wing of the Democratic Party. That was the Southern strategy.
And then they captured a new religious wing.
Correct.
And I think it's a new.
Well, they're one and the same, really. They're connected.
They were different, and they
they're different. They overlap.
Yeah.
In the Venn diagram, there's a hell of a lot of overlap, right?
The difference at the time was on the question of abortion, which is where they brought religious groups together. There was one group in the United States, one religious group that was opposed to abortion and that felt it was an important issue, but even they didn't want it to be a political issue. That was the Catholic Church.
Correct.
No one else gave a damn about abortion. Southern Baptist, white Southern Baptist groups had come out with very small commentary on how abortion was fine and how we need to work on making abortion more human positive and things like that. There was nobody fighting abortion.
Right.
What these groups did was they put money into the anti-abortion, created an anti-abortion fight.
Yeah.
They brought leaders like Jerry Falwell and like others to the table, and they gave them a political agenda, and they gave them the money to start a political agenda.
Yeah.
And we saw the first mega churches and the first televangelist movements and the first gigantic preachers with private jets and enormous amount of money coming together. And they combined this.
Coming together.
Exactly. Hey, personally, I think we need to come together just the way the Republican Party
Yeah.
did. Great model
I've
for
been
it.
saying this for a long time.
Yeah.
Yep.
They were following their model's not a bad thing. They might have
No.
been evil, but their model was good.
Correct.
But they brought that racism and religion and the same people together, and they formed a political movement that included religion. And then in the 1970s, the NRA changed. When I was a kid, the NRA was a gun education club. They
Yeah.
were promoting gun rights and they were not gun rights. They were promoting gun safety, and they wanted all kids to be trained
Correct.
how to become good American hunters and how to be safe with their guns and things like that. And that was great. And then all of a sudden in the 1970s, they brought in Wayne LaPierre and others, and they did a 180 on the NRA, and they created the issue of gun rights. And they started turning the Second Amendment to be a gun rights means freedom to own firearms. And this is a point, the late
And they
19-
accumulated ownership of all of the major gun manufacturers and
Absolutely.
ammunition
Absolutely.
manufacturers. But I
and
don't.
those people benefited and made money off of it.
They benefited and made money off of it. But it is in all of that. Whether you're talking about abortion or anything else, race is really connected to that. And I do agree with Levitsky and Ziblatt. Those issues, whether it was guns or abortion, resonated with that Southern Baptist religious community because that was the core of the anti-civil rights movement. And so
And they pulled out all the stops to
they
link
pulled
those
out
things together.
all of that, right? And you had the mass incarceration began with targeted arrests and imprisonment of African Americans for petty drug possession. Meanwhile,
Absolutely.
Brian and his friends were snorting coke and not getting arrested.
I was too young for that. I'm sorry.
Yeah, that's what your friends.
Yeah.
Not my friends.
No.
Yeah.
I grew up just after sex, drugs, and rock and roll, but before coke. So
Yeah.
I was kind of in the happy middle there.
So what the Koch brothers did was found incredible success with that Southern strategy and the local government strategy. And then in 1980, it sort of seized on the inflation and recession that followed the oil shocks and the problems of the 70s and the political turbulence of the 70s. And it wasn't Karl Rove. Who was the political guy behind Reagan? Dick something.
Oh, yeah, I can't remember. I know who you're talking about now. I can't remember the name.
I always mix him up with Karl Rove, but Rove was later with Gingrich, right?
Right.
But anyway, this notion of small government, and that resonated with everyone because in the wake of Watergate, in the wake of Vietnam, and in the wake of the turbulence, we had the sort of Kennedy Democrats and the Trilateral Commission, people like Sam Huntington and Jeane Kirkpatrick and others. Everyone sort of was wary of the failing of government, and the right seized on this, brought Reagan to power, and this message that we're going to get government out, deregulation, and most of the country went along with that because there was this idea that government failed here, which meant government was failing everywhere.
Yep.
Where in fact the Great Society programs were an enormous success in many
Absolutely.
areas. But the right clouded out that message, in part because they'd already seized control at the local levels, and so getting
the
a unified message against that didn't exist because they had created a unified message for the party across the whole country.
The Great Society is incredibly important here because from Buckley to Milton Friedman at University of Chicago to the Kochs and others, the enemy is the New Deal and the Great Society. The
Hmm.
enemy is these measures taken by the government that help the little people, that help everybody else, and that both take money from them and resources, but that create a bigger government and that
Right.
create an environment where regulation makes sense. If government is supposed to help the rest of us, then it might make sense for government to help us get clean water
Right.
and for government to prevent oil pollution
Right.
and things of that and air pollution and things of that nature. So you have to push away from those things as much as possible. The other, go ahead.
Yeah, and I just wanted to interject there because I know I have students, and I'm assuming you have students who are sympathetic to this message about deregulation, uh, and particularly for students that we teach in the Chicago metro area, the inexcusable is having no knowledge of our history. If you don't understand why government regulation on business is important, you have to read The Jungle,
Right,
because The Jungle is a work of nonfiction.
right.
It's about body parts ending up in hot dogs,
Yep.
and
Hey,
and
there's only a tiny
horror.
percentage of rat bits and body parts allowed in hot dogs now. It's a very small
Yeah,
percentage.
yeah, but it was much higher then. Like
Oh, yeah.
there were no regulations, right? And that's why we have a Food and Drug Administration. That's why we have inspections. That's why we have um, labor unions and workers' compensation and all of the rest, right? All of that came out of the prior era of non-regulation and corporate control of government, the turn of the
Absolutely.
last century.
And the interesting part is from Reagan into the future, and this is a lot of Ronald Reagan and his personality and
Yeah,
the fact that he really was a fantastic communicator, no question about it. The man had enormous charisma. Reagan turned regulation into a bad word.
correct.
And it absolutely
His
goes to
handlers
say,
did. And again, like with Trump, I don't know how much of it was actually Reagan,
he,
but
he,
certainly
he
the rich people around him and the Koch
absolutely
brothers
he was good
financing it.
at it. He
He
was
was good
definitely
at
good
it.
at
Trump is good at his message of chaos and
it. Yep,
disruption, but
that's true.
the people
But
around him or the MAGA organization, like he didn't create that.
right. Yeah,
He's
and really it's Heritage Foundation for Trump as much as anything,
correct.
which still exists, which started at that time.
Yep.
With Reagan, what we saw was deregulation was made a dirty word. Reagan
Right.
came up with on the racist side the idea of welfare queens,
Yep.
where being in poverty became a personal negative and not something where society had left you down, but
Right.
where it was your fault that you
Correct.
were in poverty.
And so
Reagan
then
also
government has no obligation if you believe that.
Absolutely. Reagan was the one who pushed us into a society that moved away from community and
Yeah.
moved to rugged individualism and picked up that idea. And from Reagan on, we look at moving into money and profit as the most important things, and short term profit for corporations is the most important. And the thing I love to look at from the Reagan era is the idea that greed is good. It comes from the movie Wall Street about Gordon Gekko. And in the movie Wall Street, the lead character at one point in time does a lecture and says greed is good. And what
Mhm.
we missed for the last 45 years is that was supposed to be a negative speech. That
Yeah.
was supposed to be the bad guy telling us
Yeah.
that he was greedy. And
Mm.
instead, we turned it into that's what our society is supposed to be. From the Bible and beforehand through today, every moral message comes out. Greed is bad. Selfishness
Yeah.
is bad. Being an individual like that is bad. But it has been turned in our society into a good thing. And what most people don't realize is that individualism exists to push us away from acting as a community, because if we act as a community, we're going to want to get more from the rich people. And when we're individuals, we don't put our power together and they get to dominate and they get
But the wealthy behind this proceed from a rejection of the idea that citizenship entails both rights and obligations,
Mhm.
right? And whether you're talking about the founders or Jean-Jacques Rousseau or John Locke
Through Kennedy.
or Adam Smith,
Yep,
citizenship, right, entails rights and obligations.
absolutely.
So the rich got rich by virtue of living in this society that grants them this rights and therefore they have obligations back to that society to preserve that society so others may also benefit. It's a
But
complete
their power,
rejection of that flip side.
absolutely, and this is the issue that libertarians, that hardcore capitalists, that market
They
capitalists,
reject the notion of obligations.
they reject the notion of
Entirely.
obligation. They also say we're all greedy individuals and we're all just, out for ourselves. And then the invisible hand is when we all come together, we make a good market and we get things for the best price.
And Adam Smith even told you that because we are greedy assholes, we need government to regulate, because otherwise we're going to have a few greedy assholes running everything and everyone else is going to suffer. Adam Smith recognized that. The invisible hand was not his recommendation. The invisible hand was his warning.
This is where the economists from Hayek through Milton Friedman and others had it completely wrong. They gave up on some of the most important parts of Adam Smith. They kept the pieces that they liked. They gave up on Smith's other book, The Theory of Moral Sentiments, which is also important. But the stuff you're talking about is in Wealth of Nations. It's not even in the second book.
Right.
And this is something the past 45 years, it seems obvious. If you and I are ultra wealthy and we have a bunch of money and we are greedy and we always want to act in our own best interest. Let's say I'm ultra wealthy and you're poor, along with 99% of the people. I thought we'd do that. Since I'm more the man of the people than you are, I thought we'd reverse at this point. So I go into that ultra wealthy category. What's in my best interest? My best interest is getting you to do things that benefit me. My best interest is using my money to buy power. My best interest is using my money to buy government and to get government to do things for me. My best interest is using propaganda, aka commercials and lobbying, but mostly commercials, to convince you that my best interest is your best interest.
Right.
So you talked earlier about people used to follow their economic interests. People still think they're following their economic interests, but the information that they've been given is such that they now have bad information. And that bad information is all in favor of the ultra rich people and helping the ultra rich people. And we've been trained not to see it. And oh, by the way, the other thing the ultra rich does among many, you think we've got a crappy education. You think we've got a crappy education system, right?
Only at Loyola.
I think we've got a crappy education system at Benedictine and Loyola, but really I'm talking about public education through 12th grade. We got a bad public education system. We do. Why? Because they've been starving it. And because they've been purposefully putting in place policies to make sure public education doesn't work for two reasons. First, to try to privatize it so somebody can make money. But more importantly, to have complacent, uneducated workers who aren't able to overthrow them and aren't able to see that the workers can have power.
No, that's absolutely right. We haven't talked about sort of the third tier of the messaging that has allowed for this mass deregulation and everyone, right? The majority of the population to sort of be confused to think that it's in their benefit. There was the issue of race, right? Which kind of was a powerful message, race and fear. On the part of the majority to sort of support this side. There was the culture war stuff, the quasi-religious, the bastardization of religion or capture of it, however you want to put it. But then also this deeply core American hostility towards taxation, which goes all the way back to the Revolutionary period and the Tea Party. There's a reason they called it the Tea Party.
Absolutely.
Right? Taxation as theft is a message propounded by the Koch brothers. And that also benefits the rich and harms and eventually ended up destroying the middle class. And certainly, so you and I are paying much more in taxes than the couple hundred richest people in the country.
It's insane.
I don't even talk to anyone about taxing corporations, right? Like why corporate taxation is a bad thing. If you just sort of separate yourself from the propaganda and ask yourself, It doesn't make any sense why corporate taxes should be lower.
No, it does. Well, and the other thing is, you look at the propaganda, and is once again, it's based on reality because some people have made it reality. So
Correct.
one of the messages we get today, which happens to be true at the moment, is it's never just increased taxes on the rich. They always say we're going to increase taxes on the rich, and then it ends up it's always increasing taxes on the middle class.
Correct.
People say that because any time that we've had proposals to increase taxes on the rich, certain groups in Congress make sure that the taxes
The rich don't get taxed.
the middle class, and the
Yeah,
rich don't
yeah,
get
yeah.
taxed, even
Let's,
though that's the message. We
you know, I'm
could
doing this off the
easily
top of
change
my
that
head.
around. Yeah.
Doing this off the top of my head, but when Reagan came in, I believe the top,
87%.
I thought it was 72%.
That was
I
87%.
thought it went down a little under Nixon from 80s to 72.
It was 89% under Nixon to 87, and then Reagan very quickly took it down to 72.
Reagan took it to 72.
I'm sorry,
but
yeah, Reagan took it to 72, yeah.
But it went well below that before the end of Reagan's term.
Oh,
By
yeah.
the time HW came in, it was down in the 20s or 30s, I thought.
Absolutely. But also, you look at taxing, and this isn't a Republican thing. Democrats have done this too. And personally, I look at Democrats as a corporatist party for the
Oh, it is. Yes, since with Clinton, with the rise of Bill Clinton, yeah, of course it has been. Yeah.
Clinton was fantastic. Clinton, actually, most human beings in the U.S. don't realize this. We now have a cap of $1 million as the maximum salary that any corporate executive can make. And that was put in by Bill Clinton. Now, that's actually technically the maximum salary that's tax deductible. So after $1 million, the corporation can't take it as an expense. But that means legitimately the cap is $1 million. But when they passed that law, they said that the executives can get an infinite amount in performance bonuses.
Bonuses, correct.
And that's when the big bonuses came in. And now we get people like Elon Musk, who takes $1 a year in salary because
and $1 trillion in bonus. Yeah.
Exactly. And everything else in bonuses. And they've set up the laws to allow them to do that effectively tax-free.
But if you just think about it, right? Like, there isn't, even Robert Reich and Elizabeth Warren, nobody's saying that we need to restore that 89% top tax, because we don't need to be able to fund a quality education, universal health care, and free higher education. A top nominal tax rate of 50% if you get rid of the exemptions and actually make the billionaires and above pay 50% on their annual salaries, that would fund everything.
Get rid of exemptions. Capital gains tax is a great example. This is another incredible piece of propaganda brought to you by the think tanks, funded by the Koch brothers network and others. Capital gains tax is enormously less than regular income taxes.
I think 13% is the less I saw.
It is the max 15%. The vast majority of us pay somewhere up to 36, 37%. Most of us cap out around 28% in taxes, but we pay our taxes through our paychecks.
Correct.
Whether you are a college professor or a janitor or a medical doctor who makes a couple $1 million a year, or a lawyer, you're still paying most of your money through your paycheck when you get that paycheck. The rich don't do that.
They don't get paychecks.
When they pay taxes, they pay capital gains as they sell off their shares in their companies. And those taxes are incredible.
And their other investments, right? Their investment accounts.
And most people don't own their own company. They own a bunch of stocks in other companies.
Yeah.
And you don't pay that until you trade those. And they almost never trade those. Instead, they'll take loans out instead of trading those. But they've made those capital gains taxes cheaper. And their excuse is, well, those are more important because those are funding businesses in the marketplace.
Just bullshit.
And it's like, I'm sorry, but their money funding the marketplace is more important than our money. If I had more money, I could fund the marketplace. If I had more money, I could put more money into stocks. How come their money into stocks is more valuable than our money into stocks?
And how does it benefit, right? Like, here's how you know it only benefits them and doesn't benefit society. Put yourself in the chair as an American of an owner of a medium to large business. And then if the tax rate on your net profits is 40% over $1 billion as opposed to what, 11% or 8% or whatever it is. Are you going to give that? Would you prefer to give that money in taxes and pay that to the government, to the IRS, or would you rather increase salaries for your workers or expand your business and hire more workers?
This is why Eisenhower,
99 out of 100 business owners will do the latter, and that still benefits the economy. In fact, one would argue would benefit it more.
This is why Eisenhower took corporate taxes over
Correct.
90% after World War II. He literally said, we don't
Yep.
want people to pay these taxes. We want people to pump this money back into salaries and back into
Correct.
growing the business.
And that's why we
That would
had
be
the
great
largest
program.
middle class in our history after the war up until Reagan, right?
Yeah, because of those taxes. By the way, I want to slide in here real quick. When we're talking about companies and taxes and big companies, we're not talking about mom and pop folks. We're not talking about small employers, 50 or 100 employees or less. We're not talking about the company where you start your own supermarket.
We're not talking about the Wise Cup coffee shop in Oak Park.
Exactly.
We're talking about
when you start your own company, you work in it and you're the main employee and you hire some people, and that's great. We're talking about the people who don't work for a living, the people who invest for a living.
The owners of it. We're not talking about PJ's hardware store. We're talking about Home Depot.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yep. So where are we at? We are at moving.
We are in a disaster of an economy.
We are.
And this politics.
Yeah, right? We started in the 1980s. And what we've seen since the 1980s with the idea of trickle down that never actually worked. Trickle down said the money, if we give all the money to the top, it will actually trickle down to the rest of us. It never did.
It only does with that high tax rate, like we just explained, right? If you have that higher tax rate, then the investments will go into the workers, into the businesses, business expansion.
What we have seen is the top salaries going up by hundreds and thousands of times, salaries for CEOs and top executives, and then the wealth going up even more than that, wealth going up tens and hundreds of thousands of times of the top wealthy people, while the average worker's salary compensating for inflation has gone up less than 20%. Most of society has seen a less than 20% increase since the 1980s. And inflation is skyrocketing. And inflation, there are all sorts of corporate numbers, government inflation, which, by the way, are political numbers that don't really apply. Just look at the last 5 years. Rents have almost doubled in many places in the country. It is
most of that middle class income increase, by the way, maybe not most, a large chunk of it is attributable to the increases in minimum wage that came after COVID, in the wake of COVID and the Biden, right? Because up until 2020, it certainly was not like the middle class income. It was maybe 5 to 10% more than it was in 1979. We're talking about median family of four income.
Yeah,
had not increased adjusted for inflation.
1960s, 1970s, 1980s, and since World War II, you come out of the military in World War II, you have one person working and they support your family of 4 or 5 or 6, and you get your 2.5 cars and your nice house and your kids, and they go to school and you send them to college. And then we move into the 1980s and we start seeing more difficulty surviving on one salary. And by the 90s, Americans have to have 2 salaries. And then you get into the 2010s and Americans can no longer afford 2 salaries. They need 2 salaries. We need 2 salaries.
They can't afford it
because it's so expensive that you can't afford to have both people working. So now we need 2 salaries to have everybody work, but only one person can work because the other person has to stay home. So we have this much money and we need this much money. And we now live in a society where over 75% of Americans every month have to think about what bill they're not going to be able to pay. Have to scramble. Over 50% of Americans have less than $500.
Massive credit card debt. And massive credit card debt.
Yeah, it's absolutely insane. And the top 1%, and especially the top 0.1%, has
it might even be lower than that now.
Early 1970s, there was 1 billionaire in the United States. Now there are a little bit over 1,000 in the United States. Absolutely incredible how much money they have. And that money has all come from
us.
that is a massive upward transfer of wealth. This is
Correct.
socialism for the incredibly rich and
Yep.
capitalism for everybody else. And capitalism has kept us down.
The percentage count, the concentration of wealth matched the concentration of wealth on the day before the stock market crash in 1929.
Yep.
That we passed that in 2015. So we've had 11 years of accelerating concentration of wealth beyond what it was in the time of Great Gatsby and right before the Depression.
Oh yeah, and it is worse than during the French Revolution. Is the
Oh
other
yeah,
other stat that's incredibly
it's
important.
unprecedented, really.
Yeah.
It's
Well,
unprecedented and unsustainable.
I look at a lot of memes and a lot of cute sayings, but I think it's something really important I just saw the other day and reposted. The idea is freedom. We talk about freedom a lot, and capitalism is supposed to give us freedom. And what it really means in our society is freedom for the rich to make money, not freedom for the rest of us.
Yeah.
There's a
Yeah.
great one I saw just this week. Freedom for the rich. I'm sorry. Freedom for the poor is not being owned by the rich.
Yeah.
Freedom for the rich is owning the poor.
Owning the poor. Yep.
And
Yep.
that's really, in a nutshell, what our society is right now.
And so we've become. I think that's a good place to end this sort of introductory episode. Our future ones are gonna.
Go ahead. I was
Go
going to say, teach a class called Capitalism and Its Discontents. I came up with it about 15 years ago. And people always tell me it's a very depressing class. You just chose a really depressing thing to end on, but I'm not sure there's a better place right now.
No, I mean, I think this whole series is going to be depressing. Our future episodes on the Who Benefits, we're going to look at a number of different policies of the current regime in America, whether whether we're talking about the war in Iran or the policies against green energy, energy policy. Or anti-gun legislation, the sort of MAGA anti-healthcare legislation, and we're going to look at who directly in the administration or close to it is benefiting the most. In other words, who's controlling each of these different policy areas for their own personal benefit. We don't see enough reporting on this in the media. Every one of these policies, which frustrates me and blows my mind, the left is calling a distraction, presumably a distraction from the Epstein files. I maintain that the focus on the Epstein files is the distraction, because what will really bring down this regime is the exposure of the rampant corruption and brazen use of public office for private gain at the expense of all of us. So that's what our
next episode on distractions, because we look at it from a slightly different perspective. I don't think we're going to disagree much, but we have slightly different ways of looking at distractions. I certainly think that they're trying to distract from who benefits, but I think the Epstein files might or might not be a part of that. So we'll talk about that one as we go forward.
Sounds good. Until next time. Thanks for tuning in. Spread the word.
Thank you all very much. Thanks, David, for producing, and we'll see y'all soon.
See you next time.